Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jasched. Today, I'm very grateful to have my business buddy, Karen Kirton, joining me. So, Karen is the founder and managing director of Amplify HR, a consulting company enabling small and medium-sized businesses to create workplaces that engage and inspire. And Karen is also the host of the Find, Grow, Keep podcast too, where you might find an episode with me on there. So thank you so much for joining me, Karen. It's so nice to have
Thanks for
you
having
here.
me. No, it's awesome. I loved our conversation when we did it for my podcast. So I'm
Yeah.
really grateful and thank you for the opportunity to come here today.
Oh, my pleasure. I love all of our conversations. Like we seem to have some very good yaps, so I'm always just happy to have another excuse, really, to just
Thank
yap
you.
about these things. So you are in HR consultancy, and a lot of people maybe might misunderstand HR, or HR might have a bit of a bad rap sometimes, or a lot of people have different relationships with what HR is. But from what we've had conversations about, you really approach it from a supportive perspective and a whole business perspective. And one of those things that I'm aware of that comes up for businesses a lot is employee satisfaction. You
Mm.
know, everyone wants their employees to be satisfied, but sometimes there can be a bit of a disconnect, or it can be sort of, balanced with a why aren't they satisfied?
Yeah.
What's the problem? All of that. So, I guess to start off with, what are the most common areas, just in your experience, where employees are the least satisfied? And
Mm.
how have you found that out?
Yeah, great question. And I'll start with, because I can't help it, different versions of HR.
Mm.
So completely agree with you. Every service function in a business will have different stereotypes out there. One of my pet peeves is when I'm watching a TV show and they say, if you do that, we're going to report you to HR. You're right. Like from my perspective, HR is actually about enabling the people side of the business. So how do we actually invest and grow our people so that they feel better in the workplace, which means they're going to be better at home, better with their neighbours, makes a better society for all of us. And the best part of all that is it actually makes your business more successful and more likely to continue. So with that as my little TED talk about
Oh my God,
what
I'm on that soapbox with you completely.
what I see HR as, for me, employee engagement satisfaction is really important. And the research is super clear. You can look across multiple studies. There's heaps of meta-analysis out there that shows globally when you have people that actually feel engaged and involved and like they belong at work, guess what? They stay with your business longer, they're more productive. So
Imagine.
I know. So your business is more profitable, and you kind of wonder sometimes, do we have to keep doing this research to show the same things over and over again? But unfortunately, yes, we do. So luckily for me, I've been running this business now for almost 10 years. I've been in HR for over 20, and I've worked with lots of businesses that really understand and believe this. So, they enable us to come in and talk to their employees and to do employee engagement surveys. And, it sounds like a basic thing, but for a lot of business owners, this is a massive step because if I do this as a business owner, I'm immediately putting my head above the parapet. I'm not allowed to kind of sit back and just go, oh, we have a great culture. I'm actually going to get quantifiable data that will tell me how we are doing as an employer and as a culture. So if you have an employer that is doing this in your business, then firstly, that's a big tick for wherever you're working because that means that they're investing in, they do care. And the next thing that I always tell business owners when we do this is I'm not going to do a survey or do focus groups unless you are prepared to give the feedback back to your employees of this is what you've told us and this is what we're going to do with it. Because
Mm.
if you do a survey or focus groups with staff and you don't actually tell them what the results were and it just sits in a drawer somewhere, then actually you've done more damage to your culture and you have really disengaged people a lot more. So, so with that in mind as context, that means that when we do this, we've got employers that, are forward thinking, that do really believe in culture and want to make a difference. And so the employees themselves will tend to be more open with us because we give that to them as context as well. And, we're a third party, it's anonymized, so they can
Mm.
say whatever they like. We're just looking for the truth so we can do something about it. So back to your question, what do we see? Generally speaking, I would say across all different types of industries, the thing that always comes up that people say isn't so great in their business is communication.
What?
So
No.
always at the bottom. And I would say probably the bottom three generally is communication, performance. So I feel that I'm rewarded for my performance, and I feel like people that aren't performing well, something's done about it.
Mm.
And another one is recognition. So, so if they're kind of like those bottom three things, your reaction is pretty much what most business owners do because we'll say communication came up, one of the bottom areas. And they'll say, but we communicate with everyone.
Oh, my reaction was facetious, but yes, I
No,
could.
theirs is genuine.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
It's like,
like,
but we're doing these emails and, maybe we do a quarterly get together. Maybe we feel like we're having constant one-on-ones, but you're actually not. So, and what we find with communication, because then we have to really dig into it and say, okay, well, what is it about it? Um, Depending on the size of the business, people kind of get to a certain size where that cross-functional communication stops.
mm,
So, about 25, 30 employees, that's where it starts to get tricky because you no longer see every person every
mm,
day. So you get a bit of that siloing happening. There's also the top-down communication. So leaders just forget. And suddenly they've got a couple of layers and they just tell the first layer, they forget to tell the next one, they forget to tell
yeah.
the next one. Another one, and I know this is close to your heart, is just, communication is not just speaking, it's actually listening. So, and a lot of people just speak, speak, speak. It's all top-down communication, but don't actually listen, ask questions, consult, really try and get
Mm,
information. And, of course, when people don't have information, they fill it with assumptions, and those assumptions become reality. And there's nothing like a vacuum of communication to start gossip. So if communication is broken in an organization, you start seeing lots of dysfunctional behaviors.
Oh my God, you just said so many different things that I want to dive into because I was like, oh yeah, that too. And that. I think just because it was the most recent, like the gossip element is that is
Mm,
like if you leave room for people to make up stories because at work, maybe that like there's a million different reasons why they might feel they need to make up a story. They're trying to make a decision about something. So they're like, well, I think it's this, so I'm just going to assume it might be this. It could be from the perspective of feeling a bit insecure, right? Like a bit insecure about their role, or like you said, like if they're not feeling like they're getting recognition or they're watching someone else perform or behave poorly and not really being addressed, when it's not their place to, that would make you feel a little bit uncertain. And,
yes.
we look for meaning and we look for stories to kind of
Mhm.
fill in the gaps. So it makes perfect sense in that case where where gossip thrives
Yeah.
and where that can then be harmful and toxic to
Mm,
the culture in itself anyway, because yeah, if there's not clarity for people to, for the cooler heads to prevail in the conversation that might be getting heated, to be like, well, look at what they said in this email, this actually been
mm,
laid out. it's
yeah.
it's
And,
ripe for, like
oh, for sure.
misinterpretation.
And the thing is that people don't even realize that their assumptions or that the gossip is incorrect because they don't
Mm.
have any counterpoints.
Yeah.
So, so I will see one and two, and I think, okay, well, I'm pretty sure that that equals three, when
Mm.
actually it equals four and a half. But I go around and everyone else says, oh, yes, it equals three, it equals three, it equals three. And so all of a sudden, like that's reality. And that's actually really hard for businesses to untangle. And I think at the moment, I know that everyone's talking about AI and the impact of AI, but so I can see that in your face, Jess.
I'm a
But
little over it because I'm like, well,
it,
what about can we get back to talking about like human impact? Like, what are we doing?
but I think it is one of the main areas in businesses at the moment where we're not communicating very well.
Yeah.
So, I won't name them, but I'm sure that people that are in this will know because, a huge global organization I saw the other day, their chief people officer came out and was talking about how, AI isn't about efficiency because you don't want to talk about the word efficiency because that makes people scared for their job. So you want to talk about innovation, et cetera, et cetera. And everything that she said made sense. It was perfectly true. But that article came out a month after that same organization announced they were shedding 10% of their staff due to AI. So,
Yeah.
so those
That.
communication messages they're not matching. So if you've already shed 10% of your staff due to AI and you've told the markets that, it doesn't matter what you say from like it's done. All that gossip, all those assumptions are now out there. So there's actually just a lot of work that needs to happen now to try and get that
Mm.
trust back and say, well, this is actually not about redundancies, And it's extreme example, but we're seeing it a lot
Yeah.
right now.
And when that's the sort of platformed example, then it does make it hard for people in smaller businesses than global businesses to have an example of what is best practice.
Yeah.
Because my background is media comms and PR rather than
Mm.
HR, but I took that very literally. So I took it literally as public relations. How do we relate to people? How do we relate
Mm.
to each other? And then add in the communication. I'm like, oh, how do we communicate? So it wasn't so much about the spin doctoring, but the the emphasis in my brain at least was, oh, how do we communicate to relate to each other? And I think
Mm.
in more recent years with my business, sometimes I've put communication forward as an example of like internal PR. It's like, what if what if you're trying to create goodwill internally rather
Yeah.
than just externally? And that's what good communication can be. Not, again, that's from a very clear point of PR not being shady, or like trying to
Mm.
spin something. But yeah, like I always see communication as that as creating goodwill with your internal stakeholders, who are your people and who
Yes.
could be your biggest, promoters of, oh my God, I loved working at this place, or I love working at this place, or
Yes.
whatever it is. Like there's so
Yeah. Well, if
much.
you ask people, like, how do you build trust?
Mm.
It always comes up open communication. You
Yeah.
know, how do you get a sense of belonging? It's
Mm.
about communication. How do you feel involved? How do you get autonomy? So, those main like building blocks of what motivates us at work. And I know there are other things as well, but communication is a huge part of that. And, I think if we, as you were talking, I was thinking about an example of where I was with the clients and I was talking with their management group, and you were talking about, what's your culture today, and what do you want it to be in 1 year, what do you want to be in 3 years? Because then that's how we build out their people and culture plans is then to match what's the business actually
Mm.
trying to achieve, and so then what does the culture need to be so that you can achieve those goals. And they were telling me that no, we know that you say communication is generally an issue, but at our business,
Mm.
communication is awesome. We're so good at it. I was
Oh,
like, okay,
bless.
great. I'm so glad to hear that.
Mm.
Went into the employee focus groups. Communication's terrible. We never know what's going on. So, there's just massive
Mm.
disconnect. And so then going back to the leadership and saying, well, like, tell me about this. And one of the examples was the employees were saying, we don't even have one-on-ones with our managers.
Mm.
And the manager said to me, no, we always have one-on-ones. So, okay, tell me about your one-on-ones. They were just work product discussions. So, what are you doing with this task? What are you doing with that? Where's that one up to? What's that client? So, whereas from the employee's perspective, quite rightly, they wanted a one-on-one. How are you? What's going on in your
Yeah, like
life?
they don't want like a whip meeting. They
Yeah.
want like a check-in, like a oh, I
Yes.
want to have a real conversation with
Yeah.
you. And oh,
Are
yep.
there any barriers at the moment? Anything keeping you up
Mm.
at night? What do you see as your future here? What would you do differently if you were the manager?
Is
That's
there
a big.
anything else you need to feel like you can succeed? Like, what do you feel like you're missing? Oh my God, all of
Yeah,
this.
so the
Yep.
employees, were quite right in that they're like, we're not having one-on-one. So I
Mm.
think sometimes where we get that, oh, what do you mean we're not communicating? It's actually we haven't taken the time and the intention to say, well, what does communication look like in our business?
Mhm.
How do we train our managers so they know what
Yeah.
to do and how to do that? And so we can get some form of consistency across the organization and then make it happen.
Yeah.
So, because, I've also had managers and business owners say to me, well, I don't ask if managers are having one-on-ones, I just assume it's happening. Now, we know the old adage about assumptions, so I won't go there. But, so for some people, it's like just such a, well, no-brainer, just do it. For other people, it's like, well, I am because I'm just talking about work products. So I
Yeah.
think there's that gap and that opportunity there if anyone's listening that is a manager or a leader of a business.
God, I
Um,
hope they are because I've been talking about it.
to really get intentional with what does communication look like in
Mm.
this business. And it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, but just manager guides go a long way.
Yeah. I think, there's two things I kind of want to go from here. One is just addressing like a lot of managers, I'm not saying all of or many, but a lot of them are kind of like, well, why should I bother? Like, what's the point? And it's like, oh, because this is what your people need and this is what people are wanting. But this is also, if you're wanting to build connection and good communication, this is just part of that. And if you don't see, and we could go into all the value of it, but if you don't see the value of it, then you don't really want to build good communication. You just want to do
Mm.
things your way. If we're having to talk, like give them a little bit of that tough love kind of honesty and talk and be like, well, is it really what you value?
Mm.
Um,
And some people just shouldn't be managers. They
yeah,
don't want to be managers. They've
yeah.
just been put into the role because it's the next
They're just
promotional opportunity.
and they're good at what they do
Yeah,
otherwise. I
but
say
they
this
don't
all
want
the
to do
time.
it.
Yeah.
And
They're
that's
so
fine. I actually think when you have that, just let them go. Like just say, yep, just be a single person operator
mm,
and get someone else in to manage. Don't try and force someone into
yeah.
managing
Yeah.
people because, yeah, if you're having that conversation, they're not getting it and they don't want to do it. That's a huge signal, right? Like, just don't manage people then.
Yeah, and there's nothing, it's almost like there's no shame in that
No.
either. It, and I think this is a totally different tangent, but I think sometimes like societally when it comes to business, like we collectively, not you and I, but we've collectively, we've set up this ideal of what it means to progress in your
Mm.
role and any like you should be a good manager. It's like, well,
Mm.
management is a skill in itself.
Yes.
And yeah, it's an important skill, but it doesn't mean that everyone needs to have that skill. Like, but then there is, communication is also this part of that, but also separate to that, and everyone should be working on that skill regardless.
Yes.
um, what I wanted to ask about everything that you were sharing there as well was, do you see it come up around different styles of communication too? Because I think about like accessibility and inclusivity
Yes.
of like neurodivergent people or also
Yes.
disabilities and different ways
Mm.
that you should, you must, like you have to
Mm.
adapt how you communicate based on what the person needs, not just, oh, well, this is just how I communicate. So,
Yeah.
so do you see that come up as part of that nuance in those conversations?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that these days, thankfully, most of us understand that you need to have a humanistic aspect to yourself to manage people.
Yeah.
And like you said, I completely agree. In the olden days, it was all about hierarchies, so you had to manage people. Thankfully, I've seen a bit of a shift in that where actually now owners and senior leaders are accepting that, or perhaps that person, just strengths-based working, that's not their strength. They're not a humanistic
Yeah.
person. So let's not do that. And I get asked a lot to talk about how to manage different generations.
Oh yeah. That's a hot,
Because
that's a hot, touchy topic too.
yeah. So it's one of the most common, workshops and talks at conferences and things that I get asked to do because it's a genuine struggle point for
Mm,
many leaders today. And I think then when you layer in personality types, you layer in neurodivergence,
yeah.
just all of those like hugely complex, right? So you can see why people are just sitting there going, I don't know what to say and I don't know how to say
Yeah.
it.
So I'm just not
Um,
going to say anything. I'm just going to
yeah.
keep doing it this way. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So honestly, I think the answer as to everything when it comes to leadership is you need to be open to learn and you need to be curious.
Mm,
So, and if you're those two things, then you will start to learn about, well, what is it that the different generations, generally speaking, because I don't like to stereotype,
yeah.
prefer when it comes to communication, and how can I be aware of that? When it comes to neurodivergence, like what does that mean? So, I remember I had a leader that was frustrated because their person in meetings just kept looking out the window. But
Oh, I understand.
and it wasn't that they weren't listening, that was actually just
Mm,
how they processed
yeah.
information. So back to communication, right? Because if you have that open conversation and you talk about that as adults and as humans, and the employee says, well, actually, I am listening, but
Mm,
this is how I'm processing. And the manager says, okay, great. Now I know, not a problem. So,
yeah.
so I think those types of things really make a big difference as well.
It's also there's a trust building element in that too, because if someone's saying, because not everyone, I mean, I'm late diagnosed autistic ADHD because I'm a girl. So like that's
Yeah, it's very common. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Lots of
just
masking.
yeah, so
Yeah.
much masking, so little research
Mm.
into the diagnostic criteria of women and girls. But I wouldn't have known necessarily to name it
Mm.
like for the majority so far at least of my working life. I didn't know necessarily to name it, and it's only been in recent years. Um, so it's almost like regardless of whether someone knows to name it or not, they there is a trust element of if they can communicate well enough to be like if they can communicate enough to be like, oh, I am listening,
Yes.
even if they don't know why they're looking out the window, like
Yes.
I don't know why. I find I absorb better.
Yeah. I didn't even realize I was doing it.
Didn't even
Yeah.
realize I was doing it. Like I relate to that so much, but I think
Mm.
there's a trust element that needs needs to be encouraged in leaders in a way of kind of trusting what they say
Yes.
rather
And the
than
relationship needs to be good to start with. So if the
yeah,
relationship between those two is not great, that conversation is going to go terribly and you're going to end up with a bullying
exactly.
complaint,
Yeah, exactly. So
So,
that's part of the relationship building, I think,
mm,
which includes that trust element, which is so crucial because it to me it sort of is how we step away from like micromanagement and all of those things that are like, no, but you should look like this or should present like this. It's like, oh, but can you trust if they are performing or if they are showing that they heard you? Otherwise, like if they didn't have
yes.
any questions, but they're still following through on whatever that was or whatever the outcome is of that conversation or meeting, that shows they are hearing it. So,
Yes.
like it's looking beneath the surface just enough rather than the
Yeah.
whole.
Because it may not be the way that you would act in a meeting, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this is why, like, back to your original question, there's something that every business can do no matter their size is
Mm,
psychometric assessments so that the managers get some self-awareness because there's nothing like actually getting something like a whole brain thinking assessment or, even DISC. Um, and I have had so many people go, oh, like they just didn't realize that not everybody had the
yeah.
same thinking style as them, right? And that is such a powerful thing for any manager to have and to start that road of actually not everybody thinks like me and I need to adjust myself
Mm.
to other people. And as a manager, that's your role. You shouldn't expect your employees to adjust themselves in their communication style. You've actually got to adjust to them. So, and and these aren't expensive things. You need to do the correct ones. Please don't go online and get freebies. You may as well just read the horoscope. But but you're talking, $180 for an assessment. It's not an expensive thing to
Yeah.
do with your leaders and just give that element of, okay, this is me and that's okay. And these are the pros and cons of the way that I think, for example. We're talking about the whole brain thinking assessment. And then they can share that with their team members. And that's how you build that trust and that relationship that you're talking
Yeah.
about, right? That vulnerability. So I think they're just really, it's a really simple thing that a lot of particularly smaller businesses don't think about because they just assume that, these assessments are all a bit up in the air, airy fairy and only for corporates. But actually, if you get the right ones and they're fit for purpose for you, they can be really powerful for your business.
Yeah, and I think if I think about different businesses that come to mind, like of different sizes, where it is easy, the smaller the business, I think the easier it is to just assume that, oh, well, they're just communicating so much more directly, so
Yeah.
let's just
That's
go,
all we
which is
need to do. Yes.
yeah, I understand the
Yeah.
assumption, but yeah, like it's like, oh, but what if you actually started to understand each person and how that person hears things or what
Mm.
they, like how they understand or whatever that is. I I think there's something so useful there, but even with businesses like you said, like that I can think of that are 20 to 30 people strong,
Mm.
sometimes it's almost like they could apply like the disc or the whatever,
Yeah.
get the determination, but not actually apply it. Sorry,
Yes.
they won't not apply it. They'll engage in it and they'll do it, but they won't actually apply it
Yeah. Where they need to.
where it's a conversation that
Mm.
helps each other work with each other
Mm.
too, because it's just seen as a thing, but everyone, and again, I'm very generally speaking here, but there's
Mm.
the risk of everyone still just being put in the box of, but you should just be able to do this.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why the type of assessment is so important. Another one that I've seen work really well is the VIA surveys. So, Martin
Yeah.
Seligman's. So if you haven't done that before, you can go online and just Google VIA survey. And it's free. And I was at a networking group and he actually stood up and he said to everyone, I did this in my business.
Yeah.
And they had a newish employee and they just found that she was taking too long to do things. But one of her top character strengths was appreciation of beauty. And so the reason she was taking so long was because she was really trying to like dig into the
Oh,
detail and because she was a graphic designer and and really get
yeah.
into appreciating what she was doing. So he said, like, she's actually a great employee for them, but if they hadn't have done that, then they wouldn't have
Mhm.
understood where she was coming from. She wouldn't have understood that about herself
Yeah, they would have
either.
misinterpreted it. Yeah.
Yes. So all of a sudden you've got people going, okay, now I understand. For me, and I've done one many times over the years, love of learning is always up the top
Mm,
there.
same.
And I just have to accept that not everybody has that. And, as a leader, if I keep trying to force people to, well, why don't you read that book? Why don't you do that podcast?
Yeah.
Hey, then that's annoying for people. So I need to actually accept that and understand it. And I still try and encourage everybody to, try and do like one thing a month, whatever that is. It could be something small, and not everyone's going to, and that's okay. But I think when you start to really uncover those things about yourself and you share it with your teams, back to communication,
Yeah.
um, and you share what it means to you and what that looks like to you, and maybe when you underuse your strengths and when you overuse your strengths, and what does that
Yeah.
look like? And you give people permission to call you out on it, then, all of a sudden you're really creating a thriving team.
I've used like the strength-based ones internally
Mm.
because it was to help them understand, it was with a smaller team too, to help them understand why each of them in their own different ways was feeling drained. And it
Mm.
was just where it's like, well, you're overusing this, you're
Yes.
relying too much on this. And it was
Mm.
just a simple, like that in itself isn't going to fix everything, but that awareness and that recognition and realization can be really helpful
Mm.
for them to shift some of their habits or patterns throughout the day. So they're like, oh, this, or it can be helpful in even having them understand for themselves so they don't feel like they're, like, because it can be so easy for them to go into p- putting themselves down and being
Yeah.
like, why can't I do this? Why am I, like, why
Mm.
is it not working? Or why am I not working well enough? Or whatever it is.
Yes.
Having that can be really useful, not as an excuse, but just as a recognition of, oh, it's because if I over lean on this,
Mm.
this is going to be the outcome. So, if I spend a little more on this, then I'm actually gonna, balance out while still
Give
doing
myself
the
more
same
energy. Yeah.
thing. Yeah, exactly. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, even when we understand ourselves, we can
Mm.
we can feel better. But then I always think that because you mentioned, if leaders do any of this stuff for themselves first and then share it with their teams,
Mm.
even before the teams have gotten to do it themselves,
Oh, yeah.
I think there's an element of it develops like an empathy, the kind of empathy
Mm.
where it's like, oh, if I can recognize that I work in a certain way, even if I don't understand it, I can probably recognize that other people work in their certain way.
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing to remember in the workplace too.
Oh, yeah. And, they just give such good common language for people to use
Mm,
that's non-judgmental. And so I do love the whole brain thinking model because for me, there's no right or wrong. It's not personality.
mm,
Doesn't put people in a box of 16 squares. And I've worked with clients for years and years and years where it just becomes part of their cultural DNA. And the
mm,
thing that I love is that, I'll get a CEO call me and say, look, I know that I'm really high green. So I'm really into process and I'm really into detail. And I have to deliver this really difficult message to someone in my team who's really high in red. So really high
mm.
relational, emotional. I don't know how to do that. Like, can you help me? And that's the power of having that kind of information is because you understand it's okay. You have your strengths and you're really good at process and detail. It's not that you don't like people, but you find it more difficult to get into that emotional relational aspect, and that's okay. And isn't it great, ask for help? So
Yeah.
that's where it really works really well in organizations, is it just becomes part of how they work.
And I think this comes back to, if we bring it home to that communication piece of, that misinterpretation of what
Mm.
is good communication within a workplace and what is not so good, even though it's believed to be good.
Yeah.
It really allows them to enrich that
Mm.
element with so much more ease, I think, than just,
Mm.
like pushing shit uphill, trying to get it done.
Yes.
Like, oh, I don't really know how to communicate better, so I guess I'm just going to try everything. It's like,
Yeah. What a lot of wasted
that,
effort. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Mm.
exhausting as well.
Mm.
So it's like, oh, it can actually enrich that, which
Mm.
ultimately gives everyone more, at least more of the kind of experience that they're wanting than
Yes.
not, you
Yes.
know.
Mm.
And what a wonderful world that would be.
Look, I
Oh,
think on the whole, people want to do the right thing.
yeah.
There aren't a lot of people that wake up in the morning and go, you know what, I want to make my team members and my colleagues' lives hell
Mm,
today.
yeah.
But our job as business owners and leaders is to actually give people the skills and the tools to be able to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses just get very busy,
Hmm.
or they see it as an expense, or it's just they've never worked in an organization that does those types of
Hmm.
things. They just don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
So I love it, especially I'm speaking at a conference and people come up to me afterwards and they just say like, that was great. Like, how do I talk to my boss about that? And I
Yeah.
love that because I think that it can go both ways. And sometimes it is just also giving your employers that opportunity to have a voice and to really have that open conversation and communicate upwards to say, actually, this would really help. Because a lot of
Yeah.
the time people don't know. And once they know, they'll do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of it. Like I always talk about top-down leadership in the sense of the fish rots or swims from the head, like it's
Mm.
like, oh, leadership have a little extra, responsibility because they're the ones with the authority and the decision making, like wield that power. But the information coming, like managing up almost and speaking up and going, this is what I want, that's such a powerful thing because it also informs leadership of that. Like it's
Yes.
literally that. It informs them of that so then they can
Mm.
actually potentially give you more of what you want, like or
Yeah.
what you're asking for. Like it's that simple as well.
Absolutely. Some people sometimes forget that. Like as a manager of people, I would rather people tell me like
Yeah.
if they say,
Oh,
you know what, I don't want to have a weekly meeting, I want to have a monthly meeting, or I don't want to have a monthly meeting, I want to have a weekly meeting, or
yeah.
every time you thumbs up me in a Teams message, I find that aggressive, and like um but if you don't tell people, then they can't
Mm,
adjust. But
yeah.
unfortunately, it goes back to what you were saying before. Like, we've got to have that relationship to begin with where
Mhm.
people feel safe to be able to say, actually, when you do that thing, it's really annoying, or I need a little bit more of this. Can you do that? Or I need a bit less of that. So something I always encourage people to do with performance reviews, the dreaded performance reviews, I know.
Yeah.
But firstly, so just keep them simple, keep them about the conversation, forget about the form, just, use the form as a guide, but it should just be about the conversation. But
Mm,
as a leader, you should be also asking for feedback. And so people will say to me, but I ask for feedback and I get told, no, everything's great. So you've got to be really specific with what you're asking. So you
mm,
can say, look, I'm really trying to work on something, insert here right now. So I'm really trying to work on when I get busy, I can become too blunt in my communications. So you know what, Jess, I'd really appreciate it if over the next 3 weeks, can you please let me know if you ever see me being really blunt in the communications or where you think I've done a good job? So
mm.
all of a sudden, like someone actually is like they know it's really specific. They understand the time frame, what you're looking for. They're open to it. So you know
Yeah.
what? You're going to get the feedback. If I just say, Jess, is there anything I can do to be a better leader? Oh no, you're great. It's fine.
Yeah.
So,
I
but
think
that
there's
takes a lot for a leader to do. It's
it's a
being
lot.
very vulnerable.
I was about to say that exactly. It takes vulnerability. And again, this was something else I that stood out as you were sharing at the beginning too, of like any business that is doing those surveys is willing to receive the feedback. So
Yeah.
that is an act of bravery and
Oh
courage
yeah.
sometimes, like especially I think the smaller the
Yes.
organization is,
When it's a founder-led business.
mm,
And I
that's
do
hard.
warn founders, but they still don't really realize until they get the results. Even when the results are great from my perspective,
Yeah.
they will still say, but why isn't it 100%? It's like, but
Yeah.
100% is really hard. And actually, if you get 100%, I'm worried because that means that people aren't feeling safe to
Someone's
speak up. Yeah.
Yeah, someone's fibbing. Yeah,
So, but
and
I understand it's hard when it's your business.
of
Yeah.
course. And I
Mm.
think, yeah, I think there's a vulnerability in that, but I think that's also there's something, I don't want to say magical because it's not, it's very like tangible. It's something powerful in leadership when you can lead that
Mm.
and show that it's okay to show a bit of vulnerability
Yeah.
just by leading by example, not by saying it, not being like, oh, you can be like, it's okay to, because that means nothing. But if
Yeah.
you were demonstrating that
Mm.
by what you're modeling, I think that has so much, that says so much about what is a secure, safe environment for
Yeah.
people, even if it means that they're not perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's just being honest and saying, you know what, I think we've always had a really great culture, but we've grown a lot.
Mm,
Or, we've had management changes, or, we've innovated, or we're going really quickly. And so I want to make sure that we can continue to grow this culture ongoing, and I need your help to do that. And
yeah,
once we like frame it in that way, and then we get the results, and then we say, you know what, yeah, I was really disappointed that we had this result around whatever communication. But I'm so glad that you told me because now I'm able to do something about it. And that's really
Yeah.
the key is that you can be disappointed. You can tell people that you're disappointed, but you're not disappointed in them.
Yeah, yeah.
You're disappointed because, you hoped that you had a bit more of that in your organization and you're really glad that people were honest about it and now you're going to do things about it. And then we're going to check back in with them and say, okay, have we improved? How's it going? Like what's happening next?
Yeah.
Because of course, if we don't do that, then we're also not really on the road. So, you know, and that's the thing with culture, it doesn't stop. So, unfortunately, I know a lot of people wish that they could just, pull out some processes and then that's it. The culture's great forever, but it's just not how it works. It's that intentional, continual, just looking at what's happening in a business, listening, and just, really looking for all those signals that are we on the right track? Because if we can keep this going really well, our business is going to do really well.
Mm. Oh, that's such a lot of good food for thought. Thank you. Before we wrap up, is how can I was gonna say, is there anywhere? I know there is. How can people follow you or connect with you, or where can they find the podcast? I'll include all the links, but whatever you want to share here, how can they
Yeah,
reach?
I think the best place is LinkedIn. So, which is pretty easy because it's LinkedIn and then my name. So,
Yeah.
which, if you listen to the podcast, you'll have that written on there. So because I do have a weekly article that goes out, we have a weekly podcast episode as well. But you can also connect with me there. It's always available as well to get in touch and have a chat,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I could have kept going, as you know, like I could have kept
as we
going
do.
as we do. But no, thank you so much because there's a lot of good reminders in that, and I think reassurances as well, even if businesses do feel a little stuck in the mud in some ways, or
Mm,
just want to do something but aren't really sure. I think there's a lot that is useful there for them to kind of keep in mind or consider. That doesn't have to be complicated either.
mm.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing
Thank
your
you.
time and your wisdom and your experience with us. It's always nice.
No, thank you very much. Thanks for your generosity in having me on here and your time. And always love talking to you and hearing what you're up to as well. So thanks, Jess.
My pleasure.